Since we spoke to you some 24 hours ago, the number of refugees, according to the UN, has ballooned from around 160,000 to close to 300,000. And they keep coming at this refugee encampment here on the Israeli-Syrian border. We have watched today as more tents have been put up for, presumably, a further influx of refugees. You're looking at one of those new ones right now, the white tent with the orange ceiling. Behind it, there is another structure being prepared for more refugees. So the Israelis are not allowing these refugees to cross their border, but they are providing aid. And here's how that aid is working. They're taking tons of food and medical supplies across. And we watched last night Israeli soldiers escort trucks up to this fence. It's a very sensitive border. They then open a section of the fence. They then drop the aid, close it, withdraw and pull back, and only then are Syrians able to come and pick up that aid and distribute it. Now, obviously, there are many more refugees on the Jordanian border, but Jordan is also keeping its border closed, saying it's taken 1 million refugees over the course of this civil war. It simply can't afford to take any more. Now, all of this is being caused by what may prove to be one of the final chapters of this civil war, as Syrian government forces seek to crush remaining rebel strongholds in southwest and western Syria. And it's interesting to reflect on the fact that 7 years ago, top US and Israeli officials were predicting or even calling for the end of the President Bashar al-Assad regime within weeks. Well, here we are 7 years later, and Israel, the US, and of course Russia have essentially all signed off on President Assad staying in power. Their very simple calculation being, Sandra, better the devil you know.
Swarm of earthquakes centered on Sea of Galilee hits northern Israel. Several earthquakes, including one measuring 4.2 on the Richter scale, jolted the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel on Wednesday morning. Most of the earthquakes, known as a swarm, were small and unnoticeable, but at least one measured in at 4.1 at about 4:50 a.m. According to the Geophysical Institute of Israel, the earthquake was located about 4 kilometers underground. On Wednesday evening, a tremor measuring 4.3 on the Richter scale also was recorded, and felt as far away as Jerusalem. Many people reported feeling the quake from nearby areas such as Tiberias, and as far away as Ra'anana, in central Israel. Nearly 30 tremors with a magnitude of more than 2.5 have occurred in the area since 1973, with 18 of them since 2000. A similar swarm of earthquakes occurred in 2013. According to the Institute, the Sea of Galilee is located on top of the Dead Sea Fault, also known as the Great Rift Valley, which runs from Africa to Turkey.
Hi, this is Tim with Morial TV and Morial Radio, here live via Skype with James Jacob Prash, coming to you live from Galilee, Israel. And this is This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. Happy to be with you here from Galilee in Israel. Let's begin looking. Yesterday, July 4th, the 4th of July, I was at the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, north of Tiberias, near Magdalene, where Mary Magdalene was from, coincidentally. And just before dawn, there was an earthquake. Not major, but it shook everything. It shook the bed I was in and so forth. And that was just before dawn. A while later, there was an aftershock or a second earthquake, about 4.1 on the Richter scale, and there was a second one. Then, late last night, here at Nahariya. Nahariya is north of Haifa, north of Akko, but south of the Lebanese border, close to Lebanon. There was another earthquake. None of these are big, but they're notable tremors. Everything shakes, and I've been in these in California before, and I've been in these in Israel before. And I've seen the aftermath of terrible earthquakes in Guatemala and in Christchurch, New Zealand. I've seen the aftermath of major earthquakes. But I've been in them before. But this is the first time I was in a series of earthquakes. A series of earthquakes taking place at this particular time. Seismologists tell us, those who study such things, geologists who study seismology, tell us that earthquakes are increasing in frequency, and the occurrence of major earthquakes on the Richter scale, how high they are, how serious they are, is also increasing. The Sea of Galilee is right on what is known as the Syrian-African Rift. It goes from Lebanon roughly down to Mozambique, right through Israel, along the Jordan Valley, right under the Sea of Galilee. And the earthquake took place under the Sea of Galilee and just to the north of it, a few kilometers from where I was situated when the first one happened, and then the second one, and then last night again. Now let's understand something. You'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, famines and earthquakes in diverse places. This one happened to be, or these ones happened to be in Israel. Big news here, because when you have these kind of tremors, it makes people wonder when there will be a big one. Again, the seismologists say that Israel is due for a major earthquake every 80 to 100 years, and it is due in terms of geological time for a major shifting of the tectonic plates. The last time this happened was in 1927, where there was extensive damage to the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. There is a fissure running off of the Syrian-African Rift that it goes under the cleft of the Mount of Olives, between the Mount of Scopus, Har Sophim, and Har Zayatim, the Mount of Olives proper, across the Kidron Valley to the Temple Mount. There are those who have speculated that a major earthquake like this, a seismic shift of this magnitude, which Israel is due for, could knock down the Mosque of Omar, could destroy it, and some have speculated that could be a way for Israel to have an open door to rebuild the temple if they can negotiate something with the Arabs politically, be it a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as the capital, or East Jerusalem as the capital, or some other treaty. We know there have been many false treaties with the Arabs, including Oslo I and Oslo II, neither of which have worked. Others have worked, such as Camp David and the treaty with Jordan. But ultimately, the Antichrist will bring a false peace to the Middle East. And every American administration has made that quest. It is presently being made by Mr. Trump and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. Their overtures, with their new propositions that have not yet been disclosed to the public, but are known to the American and Israeli governments, have already been rejected by the Palestinian Authority before they've seen them in the most recent comments this week in Prophecy. They are simply not interested. More of this in a moment, but let's revert back to the phenomena of earthquakes. Most Christians take a very simplistic view, where they see wars and rumors of wars. There's more wars than ever before in history. The wars are more destructive than ever before in history, and they are played out on a global scale, as in the First World War, the Second World War, etc., and now at the precipice, the possibility of nuclear confrontation, especially with rogue states acquiring nuclear capacity. Be that as it may, that's what they think. There's more wars, more rumors of wars. The wars are more destructive, and some very unstable despotic regimes are acquiring nuclear weapons, some of them even Islamic, such as in Pakistan. Okay, there's that. Then famines. Despite record food surpluses in the United States and butter mountains and wine lakes in Europe, more people starved to death than ever starved to death before in the Third World, by famines which are often engineered, sometimes by their own leaders in Third World countries. We saw this take place, for instance, in Ethiopia with the Mengistu regime, where he used starvation as a military weapon against his own people. Joseph Stalin did this, as was documented in the book The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn back in the 1970s. The famines are engineered. There's no reason for the people to starve. It is politically initiated as a military weapon. So people think of these famines not actually as global food shortages, but as regional food shortages, and with the element of starvation being used as a military weapon, food being weaponized, or the lack of it. Third, they think of wars, rumors of wars, famines, and earthquakes. Increase in earthquakes, increase in famines, increase in wars. Christians who take this view are right in what they say, but they are mistaken in what they fail to say. We have to understand this. Those who look at the increase in wars and the devastation increasing in terms of the levels of destruction with wars and modern wars on a global scale potentially, all of these things are happening more frequently, are becoming more destructive and killing more people. It's a sign of the Lord's returning. It's never happened on this level before in history. They are right what they say, but they are absolutely wrong in what they are failing to say. Then we come to earthquakes. Oh, there's more earthquakes, and they're higher on the Richter scale. They're increasing in frequency. They're more destructive. This points to the Lord's returning. They are right in what they say. They are mistaken in what they fail to say. Wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines. Each of these things, increasing in intensity and frequency and magnitude, are indeed historically unique because of their magnitude and frequency. However, there have been wars and rumors of wars before. There have been famines and earthquakes before, but not like now. However, there is something that most believers are missing. These signs of the return of Christ have a much deeper meaning than most Christians are understanding. Let's begin with famines. We are told in the book of Amos, chapter 8, that in the last days there will be a famine for the hearing of the word of God. The famines we see physically, a lack of food, broma in Greek, mazon in Hebrew, the lack of food that we see is symptomatic of a spiritual reality of a lack of food. Despite having online lexical commentaries, despite having Bible aids easily accessible on internet, even in much of the third world, the general level of biblical exposition has reached a historical low not seen in over 200 years. From the time of John Wesley, George Whitefield onward, there was a greater emphasis on the study of Scripture by saved Christians. Now it has reverted despite the accessibility of more and better teaching due to technology and so forth, and online education. There's a famine for the hearing of the Word of God. The physical famines are a reflection of a spiritual famine. Wars and rumors of wars. As we talked about, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation show us that there are wars in the heavenlies, Krav B'Shamayim, involving the angel Michael and so forth, the principalities over Persia, the conflict with Iran. We talked about this in Daniel chapter 10. The wars you see taking place in Lebanon, involving Iran now, are a reflection of what is happening spiritually. There's a war in the heavenlies. Satan is trying to destroy Israel to prevent the return of Christ. Thirdly, earthquakes. Let us understand the biblical meaning of earthquakes. Again, you have tremors and minor earthquakes. What those tell you in the Pacific Rim and here in Israel, as it happened yesterday and last night, that a big one is coming. Let us look at the book of Romans, chapter 8. I'll begin in verse 19. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. The creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. But the creation itself will also be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. It then continues and relates the patterns of seismic activity to maternal labor contractions in verse 21. Again, another illustration of the same phenomena. When the contractions happen during maternal pregnancy, you know the baby is coming. So too, when you see an increase in tremors, as we experienced yesterday and last evening here in Galilee, you know something big is coming. Well, what is it? We know what it is from the Gospels. We are told, for instance, in the Gospel of St. Matthew, verse 28, in the resurrection narrative, after the Sabbath in verse 1, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, this is Yom Rishon of Hag Matzot, Mary Magdalene, and I was just in Magdalene yesterday, and the other Mary came to look at the grave, that be the tomb, and behold, a severe earthquake had occurred. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. The angel caused the earthquake, an angelic being. The creation itself groans out. What is an earthquake a picture of? We see this in the symbolism of the Old Testament. An earthquake points to an impending resurrection. The earth is going to open up. The earth is going to open up. The graves will open, and there'll be a resurrection. This is going to happen. Hence, the increase in earthquakes corresponds to Romans 8, the creation groaning out. The sons of God looking to be set free. The earth itself is under a curse, looking to be set free. And an earthquake is the groaning. The groaning. It's trying to give a new life, much like maternal labor. The groaning of a woman in travail looking to give a new life. Believers are right when they say the increase in wars and famines and earthquakes point to the return of Jesus because of the frequency and magnitude at which it's happening that is historically unprecedented. They're not wrong, they're right, but they're missing the main point. It reflects spiritual things. These conflicts in the Middle East reflect the fight in the heavenlies, the principalities, the Rashiot in Hebrew, the Arche in Greek. We have other teachings explaining this. The famines, the famine for the hearing of the word of God. People are teaching Gnosticism and rubbish, open craziness. People like Bill Johnson, the New Apostolic Reformation, the Word Faith Money preachers, the ecumenical preachers, they're speaking a lot of rubbish. Hillsong is based on rubbish. And there's no theological or doctrinal substance because it is no spiritual substance. Well, this is a famine. The famines we see reflect the famine for the hearing of the word of God. The wars reflect the wars in the heavenlies, and the earthquakes reflect the impending return of Jesus when the resurrection of the righteous will take place. And those who are alive in Christ will be caught up and meet them in the air, the dead in Christ rising first. These physical things point to events spiritual. It is imperative that true believers understand this. It's not just an earthquake. It's not just a war or a rumor of a war. It's not just a famine. It is a reflection, a gauge to the believer of something spiritual. Now, the world does not know this. False religions don't know this. But the people of God are meant to know it. These unfolding of world events, disasters, catastrophes, and wars are gauges of things transpiring spiritually that ultimately point to the return of Jesus. And so we have this week in prophecy. After a short pause that we reported in the last weeks, Russia and Syria have resumed aggressive bombing of the Daraa area of South Syria adjacent to the border of Jordan and near Quneitra, visible from the Golan Heights from the border of Israel. They stopped for a while. They have prevented direct Iranian involvement, but Mr. Putin and Syria are again attacking. Israel has been giving humanitarian aid to the victims. While Israel has not made a military incursion to confront Syria or Russia in southwest Syria, it has sent humanitarian aid. The only ones actively helping the victims of Assad are the Israelis. But of course, the press, and especially the Arab press, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, don't want to report these things. Either does RT, but either does CNN or BBC give it much mention. Not much at all, if any. Israel is the only ones who come to the aid of these Arab victims of their own leaders. And it's happening this week in prophecy. The Russian directive to the Iranians and Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces in southern Syria to cease and desist and even to withdraw from certain positions proximal to Israel did take place after Mr. Putin met with Benjamin Netanyahu. But Syria and Russia themselves have increased their military activity, particularly bombing from the air. Mr. Netanyahu is returning to Moscow. He's returning to Moscow very shortly, even before Mr. Putin's scheduled summit with Mr. Trump. It is all about containing Iran and stopping Assad from militarizing the area around Quneitra that would give any avenue to Iranian animated forces in Hezbollah operating on Israel's Golan border. You see tanks on the move in Israel. You see the Golan Heights being fortified for a war confrontation, and they're on a war footing. The Israeli Chief of Staff has just returned from Washington, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot. He went directly from the Pentagon to the Golan Heights to review war preparations. Israel is not taking a chance. They are ready to fight if they have to. Quneitra will be an issue. There are other factors involved, including the Druze community. The Druze community of Israel are Israeli citizens loyal to Israel who fight bravely in the Israeli military. But many of them have cousins, relatives, even siblings in Syria. This can constitute, and does constitute, an internal political pressure in Israel to intervene in Syria on behalf of the Druze community, which are situated in the same area of southwest Syria. There is also pressure from Jordan. Jordan is the one country in the Arab world that has taken Syrian refugees. It is also a very poor country that does not have oil wealth. The wealthy Gulf states have not taken any Syrians, preferring to export them to Europe, and if possible, the United States. Let the infidel take them and support them and give them public benefit. We don't want our own kind. Now, again, this is an indictment of Islam. Muslims are not one nation and one people. They are not ummah, as the Quran falsely teaches. They don't even want their own kind. They exterminate their own kind. 500,000 Syrian Arabs, at least, killed by the Syrian Arab Muslim Alawite government. Alawite is the first cousin to the Shia Islam. Assad is Alawite. The Alawites control the Air Force and most of the military and intelligence, and many of the people they are killing are Sunnis. Now, this is not widely reported in the media globally, certainly not in the Western media, that it is a war by proxy by Sunnis and Shias to some degree. The reason that Iran fought ISIS is because they are rivals to establish a caliphate. Iran wants a Shia caliphate, while ISIS wants a Sunni caliphate. This is the reality. But you don't see people talking about this. Oh, Israel did this, Israel did that. Israel is the only ones giving medical assistance and food to Syrian refugees inside Syria. They've killed 500,000 of their own people. But this is not the problem. The problem is somehow Israel in the reckoning of the BBC, CNN, UK Channel 4, etc., etc., etc. But it's happening this week in prophecy. Let us continue looking. Israel has established a field of fire, an area that it would completely seek to level before sending in ground forces on a massive level into Syria. Israel having the high ground in the Golan Heights, looking towards the south and the southwestern suburbs of Damascus. We're talking a distance of perhaps 25 to 30 miles from the outskirts of Damascus. That's all. It could be over very, very quickly if something were to take place. And the Israelis are ready for it. In order to head it off, Mr. Netanyahu has again returned, the first time since May, for emergency meetings with Mr. Putin. Yes, the Russians have curtailed Iran somewhat, only to resume the bombing themselves in league with Assad on Israel's very doorstep. There is a new initiative being formulated by the Trump administration. Allegedly, this will have a Palestinian capital of sorts, not in East Jerusalem, but in a suburb of East Jerusalem, between essentially Bethlehem and a Jewish area known as Ma'ale Adumim. This will be the proposal. Whatever the proposal is, already the Palestinian Authority has stated it doesn't like it. But even if it did, it couldn't acquiesce to it because Hamas could object and use Islam to sway people to support Hamas. Hamas is supported by Iran, although it is a Sunni function of the Muslim Brotherhood. It becomes very complicated. Right now, Iran's Revolutionary Guards are training Taliban, who are Sunni. This is one of the Iranian responses to Mr. Trump. They are actively training Sunnis. They will do that. They will back Hamas in one case, but oppose what Hamas is in another because of the Sunni-Shia divide. It is complicated and amazing. There's no standard of rationality in what they do or why they do it. What is clear is that the Abbas government is rejecting any overtures orchestrated by Jared Kushner, by Mr. Pompeo, or the Trump administration at the present time. Now, again, we have to understand their mentality, their thinking. In Islam, it is Ishmael who's the chosen son, not Isaac. He's not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of Abraham, Ishmael, and the descendants of Ishmael who intermarried with the sons of Esau. A conflict in Abraham's genetic and anthropological descendants. It is the teaching of Islam that Islam is the Third Testament, fulfilling and replacing the New Testament and the Old Testament, the Torah of the Jews, and that Moses and Israel's prophets were prophets of Islam as Jesus was a prophet of Islam. They, therefore, are the true Christians and the true Jews, and the promises of God to the descendants of Abraham belong to Islam, through the sons of Ishmael, not the sons of Isaac. This is their thinking. They are not the indigenous people of the land, according to any archaeological record. What it is an Islamic demand that the world accept their religion. The rights of the Palestinian people against the occupation. Indigenous people cannot be called an occupying presence, as we've said many times. They're demanding you accept their beliefs. Additionally, as we've explained before, Islam teaches the world divided into Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, the world of Islam and the world of the sword. In the world of Islam, it is where Sharia and Deen, Islamic law, are established. The rest have to be conquered by jihad and brought under Islamic law. So because Muslims at various times conquered Israel, it belongs to them by divine right in their thinking. Nonetheless, and common sense, the world ignores that they have no historical or legal claim to the land as an indigenous people. It is simply based on the demand that you accept their religion as the right one instead of the teachings of Judaism and Christianity. This is what we are dealing with. Moderate Muslims who do not want to play this game and who see Islam as a religion to be reformed have the problem of the fundamentalists, including Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Hence, they could not acquiesce again to peace, even if they wanted to. The Palestinian Authority could not make a true peace with Israel. They know what happened to Bashar Jamiel, to Anwar Sadat. They know what happened to King Abdullah I of Jordan, etc., as we've explained multiple times. But these things are now becoming central once again this week in prophecy, as Mr. Netanyahu, even in advance of the Trump-Putin summit, is off to Moscow once again in an attempt to defuse what is brewing in southern Syria as we speak. The economic effects of Mr. Trump's withdrawal from Mr. Obama's sellout, where you had unverifiable conditions, Iranian denuclearization. At the same time, Iran was continuing to fund and sponsor terror to kill Americans and other Westerners, has been reversed, of course, by the Trump administration in response to what, again, many people would call the open betrayal of America and the West and its allies by Barack Obama. It is affecting Iran economically very seriously. Already they had economic problems. Iran's economic problems are further exacerbated by the droughts and water shortage that are affecting them agronomically and are affecting their capacity to be able to hydrate their substantially large population. Iran is on the brink of a social breakdown. They have begun shooting protesters in their own country. It has gone from thousands to 10,000s. Tabriz, Isfahan, and elsewhere in Iran, there is a uprising against the mullahs who have driven Iran into this mess. This situation is very interesting. It is very interesting indeed. What will the mullahs do? Now they are determined to focus on self-determination. This has caused them somewhat to put their ambitions to extend the Iranian caliphate into Lebanon through Syria and Iraq on the back burner. The Trump strategy is working, and it's reversing the advances Iran was enabled and empowered to make by the policies of the previous Obama administration. Iran is in trouble. Its currency has lost 40% of its value in the last 2 months since Mr. Trump announced the American withdrawal from the bogus deal that was never a treaty approved by Congress to begin with, or ratified by the Senate. Not the first time there has been such a reaction against the mullahs or against the Khamenei regime. Not the first time. The last time, Barack Obama did nothing. In fact, there are those who argue he sided with the mullahs against the protesters in his own country. That is not going to happen this time with Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump acting in concert with the Saudi Arabians, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Iran is on the precipice of an internal uprising. Again, Daniel 10. The earthquakes are happening. The shaking is coming. The shaking that we see foments a coming shaking that is going to ultimately be catastrophic. Some would say a Gog and Magog scenario. As we talked about previous weeks, the Turkish economy is also in serious trouble. This week in prophecy, however, the Iranian mullahs and the Khomeini himself has threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz and stop Arab oil exportation from the Persian Gulf.
Iran tests high-speed torpedo. Iran seems to be making advances in their weaponry, and it's got Pentagon officials worried. On Sunday, Iran test-fired a high-speed torpedo into the Strait of Hormuz, a vital passageway for most of the world's oil. The Hooch torpedo is believed to have a sophisticated guidance system and a range of 6 miles. The underwater missile uses supercavitation to reach speeds of up to 250 miles per hour, 4 times faster than a conventional torpedo. Iran has been testing the powerful torpedo over the past decade, most recently in February of 2015. This latest exercise was most likely testing the weapon's speed, as it did not appear to be aimed at a target. Say no to safe spaces on YouTube. Support Tomo News at patreon.com/Tomo News. Here's a look at the firepower the Iranians have amassed so far.
Iran test fires new long-range missile. Iran state-run media reported the successful test of a new precision-guided long-range missile. The Ahmad surface-to-surface missile is a variant of Iran's existing Shahab-3 long-range missile, but can be precision-guided until it reaches its target. It can carry a 750-kilogram payload and is scheduled for deployment sometime after 2016. The missile has a range of 1,700 kilometers and is accurate within 500 meters of the target. The Ahmad would be Tehran's first precision-guided missile with the range to reach its enemy, Israel. Anthony Kordsman, a researcher at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said in a report that Tehran has been steadily working to improve its existing missile technology, which had poor accuracy and uncertain reliability.
Iran's Navy unveils suicide drones. On October 26th, Iran's Navy released photographs of a specialized seaplane drone that can reportedly be weaponized for targeted kamikaze missions. Iran's new seaplane drone can be armed with missiles and heavy payloads of explosives to launch suicide attacks. If directed, it can collide with any target and destroy it, be it a vessel at sea or an onshore command center. Fitted with a camera that can be used at night and in damp sea conditions, the drone can operate for up to 4 hours straight at a maximum speed of 250 kilometers per hour. The unmanned aircraft can fly as high as 3,000 feet in the air, as low as 20 inches above the surface, and can land on water. The seaplane drone is said to have been developed primarily for maritime surveillance, and is not necessarily designed to carry a missile payload.
Iran conducts rocket tests near U.S. warships. The Pentagon claims Iranian naval vessels conducted rocket tests within 1,500 yards of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier last week. Iranian naval vessels fired several unguided rockets in a live-fire exercise in the Strait of Hormuz last Saturday. The USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier, the USS Bulkley destroyer, and French frigate the FS Provence were in the area at the time of the rocket tests. Iranian vessels only announced the exercise 23 minutes beforehand over maritime radio. NBC News reported that the rockets were fired from a position about 1,500 yards off the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier's starboard side, and were not fired at the carrier or other ships. U.S. Central Command spokesman said Iran's actions were highly provocative, while Iranian officials did not immediately comment on the live-fire exercise.
Say no to safe spaces on YouTube. Support Tomo News at patreon.com/Tomo News.
Iran blows up fake U.S. carrier on state TV. Iran decided to do it big this year with their Great Prophet war games by blowing up a replica U.S. aircraft carrier. Iran's Revolutionary Guard used a mock U.S. aircraft carrier in its defense drills for the first time Wednesday. State TV showed footage of missiles being fired at the mock carrier during the Great Prophet 9 drills. The replica carrier was hit with cruise and ballistic missiles, as well as rockets fired from speedboats. The speedboats are armed with short-range cruise missiles, medium-range anti-ship missiles, large-caliber torpedoes, sea mines, heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, and shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. Iran has conducted several war games to improve its defensive capabilities and to test modern military tactics and equipment.
There is a substantial U.S. naval presence near the Straits of Hormuz to keep it open, as well as American air bases. Bearing in mind there's already a war, a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran and Yemen, adjacent to Saudi Arabia and not far from the Straits of Hormuz, we see a very precarious situation for Saudi Arabia and for Oman, as well as the Emirates and Kuwait. Very precarious indeed. Desperate people do desperate things. If in desperation Iran moves to close the Straits of Hormuz, it would inevitably result in a military conflict, possibly the destruction of Karg Island, crippling the Iranian economy in the sense that not only would the economy be affected, but their capacity to recover would be badly affected, because most of their oil export capacity would be obliterated by such an attack. Things are indeed heating up. Now, indeed, we don't want to scaremonger. In Israel, things can come to the brink, and then things can recede, or things can go from a seemingly stable, peaceful situation and boil over in a matter of days, sometimes hours. When there's a calm in Israel, there's a calm in the Middle East. It has to be looked upon as a calm before the storm. Meanwhile, this week in prophecy, oil prices continue to increase. There are various reasons this has happened. The Saudi Arabians have agreed to push their production up to 11 million barrels per day to bring the prices down. This would hurt Iran and Russia somewhat. But Saudi Arabia probably does not have the technical capacity to go that high or to increase production by an additional 2 million barrels a day. This has helped not only Russia, but it has helped the United States, because it has made fracking much more viable and attracting much more possibility of investment capital because of the high price of oil. Fracking can be profitable in some cases down to $34 to $35 a barrel in the United States with shale oil. The question is, at what point will rising pump prices take precedent over the viability of rising shale oil prices? As long as the American economy is benefiting from it as well as being hurt by it, it's not a major issue. But if the economy is overwhelmingly hurt by it, the record pump prices that we've seen over the 4th of July weekend, now things come into a different perspective. Mr. Trump anticipated this nearly a month ago, calling on Saudi Arabia to increase production. It will be interesting to see what happens. Now, there are some countries that are so damaged in their infrastructure, like Libya and also, obviously, Venezuela. They're not major factors in the equation. But there is a pressure now by the United States to put the squeeze on the purchase of Iranian oil internationally. This will further choke the Iranian economy. How much are Americans willing to pay at the pump to help finance this? How much are Saudi Arabians willing to pump out of the earth and lower their own profitability of per barrel oil prices in order to hurt Iran and Russia further remains to be seen. Nonetheless, that is what is taking place this week in prophecy. The oil prices are increasing. We know that the Revolutionary Guard external commander, Hussein Soleimani, has told Khamenei, "I kiss your hand and I'm ready to do what you want me to do," concerning the Straits of Hormuz. Now, this is quite a situation indeed, given Iran's own internal problems at the same time. Meanwhile, incendiary balloons being launched from Gaza by Hamas are still coming into Israel with irregularity. Only now they have timing devices attached to them. They're not loosely lit Molotov cocktail type devices, but they have timing devices for their ignition. They have landed at Hof Ashkelon, near the port of Ashkelon, south of Tel Aviv, near Ashdod. But they've also, not coincidentally, begun landing in Lachish. Now we have to understand the strategic and the historical and symbolic importance of Lachish. When we read the book of Isaiah, when Rabshakeh came as the messenger of the king of Assyria, and he was speaking to Hezekiah, trying to threaten and intimidate and bully him, and Isaiah 36, he had announced that the king of Assyria, the enemies of Israel, had already reached Lachish. Lachish is the traditional western access to attacking Jerusalem from the west. And this is where the incendiary balloons with the timing devices, the time triggers, are landing there in Hof Ashkelon. It's interesting that it's taking place there. It is indeed interesting that yesterday it was right underneath and next to the Sea of Galilee. A few miles, probably no more than 4 or 5 miles from where I was staying, was the epicenter. I was near Magdala. And last night, the epicenter was again somewhere in coastal Israel along the Mediterranean, where I am. You can see the Mediterranean back of me, perhaps. Between the buildings and over that way. Right on back of where I'm seated at the moment. It's an exciting place to be. It's an exciting time to be here. But what makes it exciting is what it all means. What does it mean? Jesus is coming soon. One more item took place this week in prophecy, not being discussed by the Israeli government. At the Palmakim Air Base, which is roughly the Israeli equivalent of Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, the Israelis have tested a new missile. They haven't named it. They haven't said anything about the results of the test, but there is an entirely new missile, different than the Jericho 2 missiles, different than other missiles the Israelis have acquired from the Americans or developed themselves. This new capacity is something of a mystery, but we know it's being done in response, in large part, to the Iranian threat. Quite a situation. Tanks and howitzers are everywhere, all over the Golan Heights. I saw tanks being transported on flatbed trucks, on highways, even driving up from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to Galilee the other day. Something is going on. Israelis are on a war footing. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. They've been on war footing as many times and nothing happened, and they stood down when the threat receded. But you can never tell. Sooner or later, however, when you have those kinds of tremors, those kinds of earthquakes, you know the tectonic plates are going to shift massively. There's going to be a big earthquake. It's only a matter of time. What we see now are the tremors. Something is coming. But it is not the something that's coming that we should be most focused on. What we should be focused on is not the what is coming, but the who is coming. And he is coming soon. My name is James Jacob Prash, More Real Ministries, coming to you from Galilee in Israel. God bless and thank you for listening. Tell somebody about the soon coming Redeemer, Jesus.